Hello again, welcome back to the instructional videos for the Alleviate portal, where in this video we're going to talk about adding suppliers under this icon here, or alternatively the menu item over here. So we'll start by selecting this icon here, and you'll see a list of suppliers that have already been added into the system down below here, and a variety of color coding over this side. So I'll start by just giving you some familiarity of what we're seeing on the screen here. And we'll pick this one down here second from the bottom, and I'll explain to you what each of these particular sections of the column are across here. First of all, we've got the little green icon here on the left hand side. That is if you want to log in on behalf of your suppliers and upload any documentation on behalf of them, or manage any of their staff on behalf of them, you can simply click on that icon here and it will take you to a different coloured screen completely, where it appears that you are now logged in as that particular supplier over here. So I won't go into any details there. This is all subject to a later instructional video, but you'll see that rather than logging out and then logging back in using the supplier's login and password, you can easily get to their information with a click of the mouse. So going back to our supplier listing here, and the delay is because it's validating all the data, by the way. So the name of the supplier, the type of supplier they are, the supplier category, and then contact details, the dates in which they're engaged between, and that's important later on for when we're validating documentation status. There's then a hyperlink here that tells me when that particular supplier was notified via email, and by clicking on that it actually opens up a bit of an audit trail, and if that notification goes out several times, it'll appear below here. So it explains who was sent by and at what time and date. Particularly handy if they say they haven't received a particular email. Then to the right of that, you've got coloured squares under the heading of company documents. I'll explain that shortly. You have colour coding here that matches the legend down the bottom of the screen here that tells you the status of particular documents. So you've got the document icons, which are coloured here, and you'll see these little text message type numbers appearing, blue with the number inside, and alternatively red with the number inside, and you'll see that appearing here. We'll go into that shortly. And then the document status, once you've reviewed the documentation, it has a status associated with it. You'll see here shortly, and I'll explain that to you as well when we get to it. Then general inductions. Remember, this is not event related, this is just contractors who have been, or suppliers who have been assigned to your venue or your business. So these are where you can actually assign specific inductions or check what inductions have been assigned to those particular suppliers. So for example, by clicking on that, you'll see here there's a standard induction being associated, also a COVID-19 infection control awareness training course, but you can also select other training courses that you might have and assign them to that supplier also. Now that means that when that supplier interacts with the portal, they're the only training courses that they get access to assign their staff. Also here you can actually edit the supplier. Anywhere again where there's a hyperlink, you can change the supplier's details. If they want you to change their password, you can do it from here. And then also, this is the notification icon here. Again, similar to your staff. By selecting that, they'll get an email welcoming them to your business with a list of all the requirements that they have to do. And a majority of it can be done by hyperlink in the email, or alternatively, they also provided with a username and a password to be able to log into the portal and manipulate from there. Again, you'll see this in each of the tables where you need to tidy things up. For example, that's an archive button, so that if you need to archive a particular supplier, it's no longer working for you, you don't want to lose the information, So by selecting this, it just makes it disappear off the screen. If you need to view it at some later stage and reinstate them, you use the View Archive button up here. So let's get into a bit of detail. Just to explain the colour coding here, green squares tell me that all the documentation requirements for this particular supplier have been dealt with. They've provided the documentation, or the documentation has been marked by you as no longer required. So uploading the documentation gives you the opportunity to review it, approve it, reject it, etc. And I'll show you that shortly. If it's red, it means none of the documentation requested has been satisfactorily resolved. Yellow will tell you that some of the required documentation has been provided and resolved, but not all. And when you look down here at these numbers, they tell you a particular story. The blue text message style number tells us that 3 documents have been uploaded by this supplier for you to review. And also in that document mix, 2 of the documents that are in there have a particular problem. Now that problem might mean that the document has expired, or it may not cover the period of works. For example, it might be a certificate of currency that commences after the supplier commences work, or the certificate of currency runs out before the conclusion of their scheduled works. Now that comes down to where you, as the client of the system, choose whether to accept that risk or to pursue other additional documentation. So to see what's going on with the documents, you just select the colour code, the coloured square. And that will then open up the list of documentation that has been requested for that particular supplier. Now, you might remember there was 3 documents being uploaded for review, where you see the pending, pending, pending. And 2 of those documents were showing flags of expiry. These 2 here, obviously the ones, and this is probably a bit of older information, but just for the purpose of the exercise, this is the visual impact you'll see once you drill into that documentation data a bit further. Anywhere where there's an exclamation point beside a particular date on a document will generally tell you something about that document. By clicking on that exclamation mark, you'll see it says the document validity begins after the supplier's start date. Now, that may mean that there's a window that is not covered by a Safe Work Method statement or an insurance certificate. But for something like a Safe Work Method statement, you might just accept the risk and say that, okay, that document is suitable for the works that they're going to perform. It's a bit more of an exposure if it's a certificate of currency for liability insurance, and then it comes down to your individual acceptance of risk criteria. You can ask for a replacement document, or you can just go ahead. So here, if it's been expired for 114 days, there's probably a problem. Where it says pending, you get a choice to review the documents. So here, we've got the hyperlink to the document if you want to look at it again. For example, that's going to download, but you open up the document, you review it, and then you choose whether you're going to approve it, reject it, or in the case of where you don't believe they are required to provide that document, you can mark it as not required. So for example, here we're going to reject this particular document. So I'll approve this one. Once it's approved, that supplier gets an email immediately to say that this particular document has been approved. See here, it's now marked as approved. You can't change that status from this point forward. So it's now showing you the validity is now for 351 days, and that's been approved. So what has also appeared here is this icon here, new version. For example, if you're suddenly getting close to this particular date of expiry, and although you're not going to request a new version at this stage, you might want to mark this as the next time they're engaged by the system, they're going to be asked for a new version of that particular Safe Work Method statement document. And what's happened to the old version, you might ask? If you go to the left here and see this version 2 icon, that's the one they're going to be asked for next time. If I click on that version 2, it will give you the history of the documentation. You'll see here. So that gives you the chronology of previous documentation And it may extend to several years if you so need, because as we know, some of these proceedings that may be initiated, whether it be a WorkSafe inquiry or a legal action, you can go back and quickly identify the documentation that was in place at that particular time. So the next time this company is going to be engaged, they'll be asked for a new version of this particular safe work method statement. There are other ways of managing supply documentation associated with events that actually, when you assign a particular supplier to an event, it picks up that document status that you've already got here and just carries it over into the event phase. And I'll explain that much later in one of the later videos. But what happens afterwards, you might have seen one of these has gone from a 3 down to a 2. It's been resolved. But if I was to send another email here, it actually just adds to this chronology here. And by clicking on that, you've got the entire history of when they were engaged via emails from the system. Again, very handy for an audit trail purpose. I've explained to you the general inductions and how to view and edit some of those criteria that are inside the portal. And I'll show you later on where you're adding a new supplier to your list where the supplier category doesn't quite meet your needs. But so I'll just show you by adding a new supplier at this stage anyway, and show you how it would work. So, forgive the spelling. Anywhere where there's an asterisk is a requirement for details. If it's not a compulsory field. For example, trading names and phone numbers, but mobile numbers are very important. And then their start date and end date. Now, for a supplier that's going to work for you for 12 months, you might put the terms of their contract in there. The value of this is they will typically have insurances that expire sometime during this period, and you'll get a visual flag to address that should that occur. So, just for demonstration purposes, we're going to put this supplier in working to the end of September. We're going to assign them a role of food vendor or supplier. And what you'll see here, the system has already been mapped against the typical things you would like to see from a food vendor or supplier in your documentation collection. So the system has a range of 30 plus supplier types already in it, already pre-mapped against the typical documentation that you're going to seek from those particular suppliers. Because a food vendor has different documentation requirements than a construction provider. So again, later on I'll show you how to actually create a category if the ones available here are not satisfactory. Then again, general inductions to the business. And then the contact person's details here. And you might want to give them a position and add them to your list. And now you should see them appear down here at the bottom of your supplier list. Again, you'll see the documentation status is red. But what's missing here is you haven't notified them of their assignment to the business. So by clicking this envelope here, it then sends that person an email direct and updates this status here. So you can quickly tell who in your supplier list have been notified via this method. You see the gaps. So that has shown you how to add a supplier to this silo, but also the meaning of all the things you're going to see on the screen in front of you. Again, down here there's the legend, and trial and error works best. So I look forward to the next video.